Now we're joined by Chairperson of the Board and former Executive Director at the Institute for Security Studies, Dr. Jakkie Cilliers, to speak about President Cyril Ramaphosa's appearance before the Human Rights Commission hearings tomorrow. Very good evening to you, Dr. Cilliers, and thank you so much for speaking to us. Perhaps I'd like to start at a point where we talk about if there is a distinction at all between testimony and giving evidence tomorrow, what the president is expected to do exactly. As you heard, some of the contributions by various speakers there, one of them being political analyst Jakkie saying he would expect the president to firstly start by expanding on how he got it so wrong.
Good evening, SABC. Well, I think one must acknowledge that the mere fact that the president is prepared to appear before this commission, as well as before the Zondo Commission, as well as the process that he adopted with the appointment of the National Commissioner, reflects a acceptance of the rule of law and the division of responsibility. So I think it's important to reflect upon that. Having said that, the Commission of Inquiry by Professor Sandy Africa was damning in its findings. It pointed many fingers at the entire executive, which is why eventually the Democratic Alliance had a motion of no confidence in the cabinet as a whole, because it is the entire top security structure that very evidently did not operate. And the president sits at the apex of that system. The system clearly is broken. Different departments and organizations are not talking to one another, and if they do, then their advice is not taken seriously, and that we saw with the evidence from the intelligence department, from what came from the intelligence system. Of course, that reflects the fact that we don't really have intelligence because of the way that it has been instrumentalized and broken under the administration of the previous president.
Jakkie, before we go too far, I'd just like to complete this train of thought, which you said the president is the apex of what is problematic, the security cluster. He is, of course, going there in his capacity as head of state. And head of state, we speak about him as commander-in-chief. Yes. The events that we saw today, which is also quite interesting, the early release or firing of the National Police Commissioner, does it then not divvy up, putting parts, those that are favorable and those are not, when we talk about this unit of the security cluster of which the president is the commander-in-chief?
Yes, I mean, it's easy to break things. It's very difficult, I think, for the president to put this together. What is very evident is that since he became president, President Ramaphosa has prioritized economic reform, but 80% of his time he has to deal with the factional infighting within the ANC. And then in the remaining 20%, he largely has prioritized economic reform and trying to get the economy going, because long-term, only economic growth can really grow us out of these problems. He has not spent any time until very recently on looking at the security cluster, and those chickens have now, well, they came home to roost last year. And now we see a concerted effort to bring stability to the security cluster. But I mean, this cuts to the heart of the problem within government and within the ANC, which is the lack of accountability. And that, of course, starts with the president. But the fact that he is appearing in front of the commission, I think, is very important.
So I'm wondering what the president is expected to say. And I go back to the point that was made by Jakkie saying that he expects the president to explain why he got it so wrong. And I'm thinking this is in reference to the criticism President Ramaphosa faced when he initially characterized the uprising, the rise, as ethnically motivated, fueled, inclined.
It's very evident that government did not realize the extent of the crisis. and was slow to react, and in my view should have instituted a state of emergency. But bygones be bygones. We saw the departments fight with one another, not coordinate, defense and police at odds with one another, nobody listening to intelligence. These systems need to be resolved, and we need clear direction from the president that this situation is not going to repeat. We're heading for the ANC's National Elective Conference in December. And as we saw in Ekurhuleni and elsewhere, violence and instability in South Africa is on the rise, largely because the factional politics within the ANC is spilling out into the open because the cake that is the ANC is declining. So we need to take security seriously, but how the president is going to instill confidence in that, I think is one can ask the question, but I think that the actions that he's taking about senior appointments within intelligence, although nobody knows what's happening there, and in police, these are important, but they will take time to have effect. Let's hope that the apex structures within, just below cabinet, NICOC and the other structures, that they are now operational. I think the essential problem that we don't have any visibility on is what's happening on the intelligence side, because that's where the monies had been siphoned off, and that's where, in particular, President Zuma had instrumentalized that as part of his campaign originally to instill his candidate of choice in December of 2017 during the National ANC's previous elective conference.
Because of these factions of the security cluster, we've heard for years now how it has been, as you said, factionalized according to the power struggles. How likely then is the president to contradict his ministers and these high-ranking officials, including General Khetla who's appeared before the Human Rights Commission? And I'm asking this against the backdrop of what you were saying, which you reminded us, the State Security Agency, we heard saying that they'd given something in the region of 14 reports warning against this. We've had the police minister, Bheki Cillliers, saying that he was pretty much left to fend for himself without his national police commissioner. And all of these, the president, will he be hamstrung not to be remonstrated in what he says?
Well, ministers contradicting one another and the president has been a hallmark of the Ramaphosa cabinet. There are indications that President Ramaphosa feels more secure in terms of his position within the ANC as he heads towards the December conference. We see shifts within the appointment, particularly the office of the Secretary General, which is very important if you want to make sure that there aren't all kinds of shenanigans with the elections. We see an announcement by the president that the private sector creates jobs, not government. A year or two ago, that would have been unheard of. These are signs of a growing confident president. Also, the way in which he's moved very rapidly to appoint a national commissioner. So there are signs that the president feels that he doesn't have to spend 80% of his time fighting the internal battle, and that his faction within the ANC is becoming increasingly dominant and confident. Let's hope that that translates into more action, and much more rapid action, both in the security cluster and in the economic cluster, because we are in a difficult situation. And we need to manage the insecurity in South Africa, and we need to while we get the economy going. And there is a long road of challenges that lie ahead. You can only look at the complete standstill in government infrastructure spending, which is touted as one way of creating jobs and growing ourselves out of this. So there's a long road ahead, I think, for the president to try and unlock the potential to move South Africa towards greater stability. So
he would no doubt want to be demonstrable of somebody who deserves that trust and faith from the public, as you've mentioned, somebody who's getting all his horses in line in a neat row. But the question is, a lot of what needs to be said around this is pretty much in the public domain. We've heard from these high-ranking officials before this SAHRC. Apart from the president pretty much reiterating what we know, what can he say to convince the public that not only is he in charge, but he is in charge of the reins of the security in this country? Because you'd recall that the police minister at some point mentioned 19 individuals who are said to be behind these uprisings, the riots, and it was believed that they were very high-ranking, prominent people. South Africans have been waiting, and they've been saying, but you've just been showing us pretty much small fry in relation to what we expected.
I'm sure the president will put on a very confident show tomorrow, and a convincing one. He's a seasoned politician, and he's very good in these kind of, I would almost call it intimate settings, saying, sort of pleading mea culpa, I'm sorry, we are at odds. The ANC stands first in the row of culpability, and cabinet stands in the we accept complete responsibility, and so on and so forth. But I think we've all heard it before, and we've heard it many, many times. And what South Africans want is they want clear and rapid action. That kind of action that we saw with COVID initially in particular, that we've seen within the turnaround of SARS, which would demonstrate that it is possible to turn even the police around. Because the damage that has been done within the police is, and within the criminal justice system broadly, and within the entire security cluster is deep. So I think we want to see clear action, but what does that mean? It probably, the only thing he can do at the moment is to bring competent career policemen, women, intelligence, defense, and other people into the security cluster.
So, Jakkie,
there have been positive movements in that.
Before I let you go, is Fanny Masemola one such a career policeman who bring about that confidence that is necessary to say we are getting our house in order?
By all indications, yes. If you look at his CV, you look at there's no blenishment. He's been appointed, very importantly, by a panel that includes a variety of very senior and former policemen, as well as his boss, which is probably his major problem to manage, which is Jakkie Cilliers, because he's a professional policeman. He's not a political appointment like Jakkie Cilliers was, who doesn't know anything about policing, and it ends up causing damage that's taken a decade to try and resolve. So no, I think we need to give him our support, and we need to give him the space, and I hope the minister will give him his space to really look at the police and start slimming down a bloated structure and pushing functions of policing down to metropolitan and local level, which is where they belong.
All right, thank you so much for your time and your insights. Always appreciated. Dr. Jakkie Cilliers is chairperson of the board and former executive director at the Institute for Security Studies. And those qualities, outstanding record that President Cyril Ramaphosa has been speaking of Fanny Masemola. Just a quick glance, if you haven't heard, he's been credited with securing major national and international events, including UN summits, climate conferences, the 2010 FIFA World Cup, and there's also the fact that he's played a very high-ranking role in terms of the COVID-19 national ops teams, and so, as you heard Dr. Jakkie Cilliers say, that he's got a sterling record as a policeman. This is certainly what President Cyril Ramaphosa wants to tout. So we'll be watching the space, bringing you all the details as and when they come in.